And in the new book that I released, I actually don't use authentic and authenticity as much as I use realness. Because I think if I said, Rani, be real with me. You know what that means. I'm saying, let's cut through all the smoke and mirrors and pomp and circumstance. Let's just get real. There's a clarity there.
Welcome to Working Women Mentor, the podcast that delivers mentorship in every conversation. Each episode, we meet remarkable women who share the real moments, challenges, and breakthroughs that shape their journeys. These are stories that inspire, empower, and remind us of what is possible. I'm your host, Rani Alpers, and I cannot wait for you to meet today's guest. Let's jump in and uncover your next mentor moment. Hey everyone, welcome to Working Women Mentor. I'm your host, Rani Alpers, and today we are talking about personal branding and reputation management. These two topics are so hot right now. So I'm excited to introduce you to Lida Citroen. She is an incredible powerhouse in this space, and she is giving us every nugget that you can imagine today. Without giving her book completely away before we get into the episode, she is someone who is working with executives and individuals in over 30 plus countries. She volunteers with the military. She has a passion for people, and she understands just that social awareness, the well-being, the how people are receiving you, the what you can do when you're out there. And if you ever need reputation repair, she is your woman. So I'm excited to introduce you and jump into this episode because we cover so much. You can just feel her authority, her enthusiasm, her passion, and I'm just so excited to introduce you to Lida. Here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to Working Women Mentor today. I'm so excited for you to meet our next guest. Lida, how are you today? It's so nice to meet you.
Excited to be talking with you.
Oh, I so appreciate that. Well, would you please introduce yourself to our guest?
Sure. So my name is Lida Citroen. I spent 20 years in corporate, working in branding and marketing and public relations for some of the best, most amazing global companies. And then I started my own company in 2008, and I work as an executive coach, a speaker, and an author on the topic of personal branding, reputation management, and building influence.
So many areas to touch on that we're all not sure of. So this is going to be some great ideas, I think, today. I'm excited about it. Before we get into everything, I always ask our guests to text a friend and ask them how they would describe you. Did you have a minute to do that?
Well, it's interesting because I do that regularly.
Good, you do? So you just went back to your text history and you're just like, okay, let me pick a good one.
No, I didn't want to just pick a good one. They're not all good. But, in personal branding, it's really important to just know how we're being seen, how we're being perceived. And so I've done that periodically. And when I was thinking about what to share, I thought, something that struck me, which often happens with clients, because we think we're seen one way, but sometimes we're not, or sometimes people use a different word. I had a lot of people, and my friends would describe me and use the word warm. And I never thought of that word with myself. Like I try to be empathetic, I'm inclusive, I'm compassionate, but the word warm, and as I coach my clients to do when you get feedback that's unexpected, you decide, is it something I want to lean into or do I want to modify that? And I really kind of leaned into it.
So are you feeling warmer? Are you wearing this hat of warmth?
Not physically, because I'm in Colorado and it's a little chilly today, but I think that almost gave me permission to be more warm, that people are seeing that. And with all different clients, I work in over 30 countries, and warmth translates. And so it was an interesting word. I mean, everybody says driven and successful and generous, but warm was one that I kind of like. I'm owning it.
I love how much you looked into this and you're wearing it. And often we're like, oh, that's so sweet. Oh, that's great. They think that of us. But you've taken it and you're applying it almost. And, it's a great point even on language. translation. And I always say smiling and, I'm such a hand talker sometimes in any country I'm in. It goes so far because, even if you can't speak the language, that warmth is translating. I'll remember that. That's really great. Okay, so tell us, how did you get started? Because you have had such a long career
Very
and
long.
not in terms of age numbers, right? Of course, but you've been helping leaders in, so you said even 30 countries all around the world. I mean, you're taking this path of executive coaching, personal branding. How did you get here, Lida?
I would love to say it was a straight line, but I think for many of us, it's never a straight line. I was supposed to go to law school after college and was ready to go and decided I wanted to take a year off. And for many, many years, my father would say, "How's that year off going?" I'm really glad I didn't go to law school because the way that I think is all about future. It's all about new and ideas. And I think that the legal training would have given me a different perspective.
For sure.
But, I got that first job and then I got the next job and people kept telling me, "You're good at this." So I did more of that. And I think I did what a lot of women in particular and a lot of us do, which is we just kind of go through the motions. And when we see something that people recognize and reward, we do more of that.
That's right.
And after 20 years, 2008 happened and many of us found ourselves out of work, and I was as well. And it was really the first time I stopped and went, okay, I've done all these things that have checked all the boxes under the word success, but what do I really want? And that was really when I thought, I've helped companies and products and services build their brand, go into marketing, marketing in complex markets and all that businessy stuff. But what if I worked with people? What if it was people that we built brands around? And keep in mind, 16 and a half years ago, nobody was using the term. So, everybody looked at me like I had three heads. But it really was something that challenged me, but also built on what I knew how to do. And in that process, I found myself. I found who I really am. I love what I do for a living. I can't believe I get to do this day after day. And so it wasn't like I designed it. I wish I could say I sketched it on a napkin and no.
You never made the vision board is what you're saying. It just...
I've done vision boards, but I didn't at the beginning. I just organically leaned into what felt right, what the market needed, and where my skills came in. And it took off, just took off.
What felt right? I love that because often we pull away from those things like, oh, it feels good. Not sure if I can make a living that way, or we're doubting what feels right often. So leaning in again is a great guide for you. Well, and I'm curious about the experiences that you had that helped you recognize that I am passionate about this. I am good about this. I know you said you got feedback, but kind of take us behind the curtain a bit.
What was most interesting is that I'm not a risk taker. I don't think by nature I'm a risk taker. So starting a business in the worst economy this country had seen, 2 kids about to go to college, was unlike anything I'd ever done. But it felt right. And I can't rationalize that. I think when we know, and we know so firmly and deeply and unwaveringly, so it feels more natural. And I probably should have been more scared. I should have had more sleepless nights. I just didn't. I was doing what was helping people, making me money, and that I was loving. So it just was like, it's supposed to be harder, but it doesn't feel hard. Now, looking back, it probably was a lot harder, but people are always looking for their voice. They're looking for how do I tell people who I am in a way that they will recognize and give me opportunities, right? Promotions, clients, new projects, and personal branding solves for that. So whatever term you wanted to use, the tools I was using are the ones that solved a need in the market. And it really hasn't changed.
And 16 years ago, personal branding was starting to become a topic, but not like it is today. And especially with our technology and social media and so forth. But is there a moment where you were like, oh, personal branding, that's what this is. That's what it can help someone with. Like you saw the impact of actually helping build that brand?
I wouldn't say it was a moment. It just happened. I thought I was going to start a company that was corporate, that was serving as a consultant corporations, but I wasn't finding I liked it, right? I mean, I'd worked for big companies with lots of resources, and now I was going into smaller companies that were like watching every dollar and not willing to take chances, and my initiatives were off. So it was a conversation with a friend where she said, what you've always loved is helping the people in the company build their voice, build their brand. But again, we weren't using language like personal branding. Then the first couple clients that I worked with, I cobbled together a methodology. I read a lot of books, and I think we all do that, right? We go out and see what's in the market, and then we add our own flavor to it. And the methodology worked for the first couple clients I worked with. And it was like, okay, so we're on to something here. And then I just kept doing it and refining it and realizing that it's not a checkbox system. It's something much more organic. And that's really where I think I freed myself up to create better value, is when I stopped thinking of it like step 1, step 2, step 3. These are the questions. And now you have a brand.
Yeah, it's like I like how you refined your approach over a little bit of time, but the focus was still people. And I imagine, we're all different. We all have a different set of value systems and how we want to be seen. But I imagine you have found that magic sauce when meeting people. And we'll get to your book because I want to talk about that because there's a lot of magic sauce in there. But you mentioned earlier on reputation management. And I have to say, when I hear this, when my girlfriends hear this, it's like, whoa, there's a scandal. Like, there is like high profile, something's going on. We need a fixer. Like, I feel like that's what most of us think about when you hear this, Lida. So, what is your role in this? What is this reputation management piece that you're working on? I'm curious.
Sure. So the way I define it is your personal brand is what you do. Your reputation is what you earn. So reputation is sort of the category. Personal branding is one of the strategies to manage reputation. Some people have fabulous reputations. They have great brand assets. They just haven't put any thought to it or any structure. So I just kind of help them build out the structure for it and make sure that every decision in a marketing sense, which marketing comes later, is consistent with how they want to be known. A lot of people, come to me and say, I've never thought about this branding. I'm on social media. I've got a bunch of friends. I've got some business contacts. What do I do with all this? And how do I build something that makes me feel like I'm really showing up as myself? So reputation management is how we manage how we're perceived. And personal branding is one of the strategies we use, just like reputation repair is one of the strategies we use when things go sideways.
Has anyone ever had a sideways situation, Lida? I mean, any bad reviews? Like
how much time do you have?
Give us the dirty stuff, right? The stuff that, because really, like, I think of it even just from a review or the hater comments, right. The things like that. What should we be on the lookout for? What's going on out there?
Well, reputation repair is one of my specialties. I actually wrote a book a few years ago called Control the Narrative. And Control the Narrative is one of the very few, if not the only book for individuals that talks about reputation repair. Because I've worked with a lot of clients who have made mistakes or been in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we often don't think about that. But I've got horror stories of people who thought they had air cover from their employer and then found out they were going to be the scapegoat. I mean, these are good people. These are people who didn't do anything wrong, except they didn't stand up for themselves early on. But yeah, people make mistakes. They have lapses of judgment. And those are very interesting cases when I take those on, because I invest a lot emotionally when I'm helping someone who is facing the potential that they may not have a career, a social life, or a family life going forward. So it's very emotional work, depending on what's happened. So there are definitely people I choose not to work with.
I could see that. So you almost have to interview your potential client. Yeah.
On both sides, though, even if it's proactive, positive personal branding, because some clients you're just not going to click with. But, when somebody makes a mistake and they own it, I mean, I'm into second chances. I'm a believer in second chances. And if I can help somebody rebuild their credibility and their community using my tools, I try to do that.
It's nice to know, one, you're out there, right? So anyone listening, if there's a repair to be made, you are the lady. If someone is, for example, let's give a couple of situations where, might be a corporate situation. They might be getting thrown under the bus. They might be getting a bad name for themselves. What would be one of the first couple of easy things that someone can do to step back and go, whoa, that might be me right now, where I am in my role today?
Yeah. So usually when we think of reputation repair, we think of the person who goes off on social media, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to let them know what I think about this legislation or this legislator or whatever, or this community. But a lot of times it is someone who has just over time established a negative reputation. And people don't want to work with that person. They don't want to promote that person. They don't want to give them resources that help them be successful. And that person's going, what can I do now to unwind everything? Sometimes it does require working with someone. And I'm not saying that just because, that's what I do professionally.
Sure.
But sometimes it's really hard to get out of our own emotional head, because the first thing to do is separate emotion from fact. And that's easier said than done, right? I know if I see something negative somebody says about me, which I'm grateful it doesn't happen often, we emotionally start spiraling and all those thoughts come up in our head. So sometimes having a guide or somebody with you can help say, okay, but that's how you feel. What actually happened? Sometimes what happened isn't as big a deal, but to you, it feels like a big deal. So, what the situation is drives what happens next. So first, try to separate emotion from fact, and then assess what really happened. Is this a one-off comment by a troll on social media?
Right.
Or is this your HR department calling you in because
it's popular opinion? Yeah.
Yeah, you went off in a meeting and people are upset. What is the severity of what happened? And then your plan comes after that. Are there reparations? Are there apologies that have to be made? To whom? Are they public? Are they private? Are there actions that your community or your boss needs to see to show change? There's not a one size fits all. And I think that's the good news, because that would be really limiting.
That is the good news.
Some people in the process of a reputation repair find out that maybe the reason they acted out is they really don't like what they do.
Right.
And they're not happy. So maybe there's some change that needs to happen. And those can create some significant life decisions that are positive.
Imagine in some of these situations, you start to feel like a therapist as you work your way through the situation.
I have to be careful because I'm not a therapist.
Right, I know.
But I tell my clients, sometimes especially my intake work at the beginning with a new client, I have to get behind the curtain, right? I have to know who is this person. They might be really good at selling me one side, but I'm going to ask them some questions that are going to be really hard to answer.
Yeah.
And they're exhausted. They're like, I feel like I've just had intense therapy. But that's not the point. The point of my work is to know who I'm working with so that I can best represent them.
Yeah. And I love, even as you get to the other side of a repair, now you're almost back to that personal branding, right?
Yeah.
The positive side,
Very much
where
so.
it's like, well, now what do we do? How do we want to be seen going forward? It's almost what I'm hearing is you provide people not only a fresh start sometimes, but also a start in their passion. And then how people can receive them probably fuels that passion as well.
Oh, and it's so gratifying. I sometimes, and that's why I say it's emotionally taxing, but sometimes I meet people at their lowest. They've spent money on the lawyers. They've hired the SEO firms to go out there and scrub Google, thinking that's going to make a difference because they don't want the Google searches showing up. Right. They've spent all this money. They've spent all this effort. And they're just like exhausted. And there is hope. There's always hope. I think as a people, we are understanding. We may not be forgiving, but we are understanding. And, I have sat with people who are really looking for hope and be able to deliver that and then show them the strategy and the tactics, right? Not just pump them up emotionally. When I see them on the end of our work, It is really cool. It's really cool to see them, sitting taller, smiling more, posting online, going out in public
and doing
the
them.
grocery store. I had one client who was afraid to go to the grocery store because he thought people were going to stop him and say, what happened? I heard what happened. And
oh gosh,
that's no way to live.
I'm excited for you just going through this process. Like I can see that just it's the flourishing piece.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, who are some of, you get to mentor, if you will, in some ways and guide folks through processes of all the positive and the negative. How have you experienced mentorship in your life, Lida? Have you had some people that have really made a difference and helped with the way you communicate and lead today?
When I saw the title of your podcast and I researched who you were, I so applaud what you're doing. I have always wanted mentors. I don't know if it's because I'm a really strong personality that I set off this impression that I don't need help, or if I've just never gotten to a place where I've been willing to accept that kind of mentoring. I've always wanted a mentor. So if there's a mentor out there, but I have mentored a lot of people. And I remember the first time somebody called me their mentor. And I was like, I thought we were just friends. Like, I thought we knew each other. She used that word. And I thought, well, what does that even mean? And then I, again, leaned into it because I loved what it stood for, right? It's guiding somebody with no expectations because I'm farther down the line. Mm-hmm. So, I think the place that I've probably gotten some of that is my work with the military. Mm-hmm. And it's never been formal mentoring, but I do a lot of mentoring in the military space. But I think when I first got into working in the military side, which is about 15 years ago, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I had some wonderful people who would sit with me and explain terminology, explain what the different branches meant, explain what the culture was like. And that's probably the closest thing I can think of to actually having mentors.
That early years, right? Like the earlier stages of your career. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was wonderful. I think there's so much power and there's such a beauty in mentoring. What a gift that you can give and what an act of service.
Well, thank you. That's so kind. And I, like you, it's like, I crave that mentorship as well. Like, I always used to think it must be a formal program. Where are these mentors out there? I didn't have them either. But then you start really reflecting on your life and you know that, hey, there are moments from this person and moments from that one. And they are all around us in ways, but until you start sort of thinking about it, and it sounds like you already, of course, pay it forward. So the friend that you had, that sounds like one of your earlier moments of like, oh, I actually am a mentor in some way. I'm helping someone.
What is this thing? Well, you're absolutely right. I think, mentorship isn't ongoing and it doesn't always have to be formal. It can be those one-off conversations where somebody gives you a gem that maybe you don't even use right away. I've definitely had plenty of those. They implant an idea or a fear. Thank you for that. Or just, something that I build on or years later come back to and say, I remember having lunch with that person and they said that, and that changed everything.
Changed everything. It's interesting. I had someone very early when you just said something that reminded me of someone I didn't forget about him because I'm talking about him, but early in one of, when I started in a career, this gentleman recognized that, oh my gosh, she's 23. She has no idea. Like I was all heart and soul and I was going to do this, right? And he recognized that and he showed up at my office and he had been in this industry his entire life. Wow. And showed up at my office with, I remember, a 6-pack of very cold root beer. I loved root beer. And sat down with me and literally, he was not a competitor even of mine, but sort of. And he just said, Rani, let's run through this. And anytime I have like an industry thing that would pop up, I'm like, what would you do? How would you have done this? And I realized he saw in me that like, she can do this. She just may not know everything yet. And that's sort of how your experience was too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what an opportunity to go back to those people, which whenever I talk about mentorship, being different than coaching, I always say, those people who've given you those gems or those conversations or mentored you for a period of time, like we want to know how it turns out. Like, go back to them and say, you and I had this conversation 10 years ago, 15 years ago, a week ago, and this really resonated. It means so much to the person who gave that to you, because it's kind of ungratifying if you mentor someone and you don't know how it turned out.
That's true. That's a great reminder. Give people, we like feedback.
And updates.
Yes, updates. So we've spent time on this. We cared enough, right? So give us an update. So when you're, the people around you, Lida, how do you find yourself evaluating folks that maybe you do want to spend that time with? And we talked about earlier that you interview clients. They interview you, I'm sure. And that's a little bit of it. But when you're freely giving your time and experience and mentorship, what do you look for in people?
Well, first of all, if they've served in the military, then I will mentor them. That's a given.
What is your connection to? Yeah, I was going to say, what's the connection to? Why? What time?
I have no personal connection to the military, but in 2009, at a Denver Broncos football game, the team did a tribute to returning military and talked about some of the struggles that service members face when they reintegrate into civilians' culture. And what they were talking about was positioning and finding your value proposition and marketing yourself. And I went, that's all what I know how to do.
Bingo.
And I knew I wanted to serve. I didn't know where. And so I made a commitment, 15 years later, I made a commitment to finding a way to serve the military. So I teach, I write 3 of my 7 books are for the military transition, and I will mentor anyone. I mean, I'll do my best to make time. Sometimes that's a little harder, but that is a given. I connect on social media with them. I want to be that voice that supports them. But I have a lot of people who will say, I want to be where you are, so can you mentor me? And I think it's really important as a mentor, as well as a mentee, because I definitely think it goes both ways, is to set those expectations. So, I'm a professional coach. And when somebody asks me for mentoring, but really what they want is professional coaching without the fee, I have to navigate that differently, right? But I will make those exceptions. And sometimes I will find someone who is like you with that gentleman who brought the root beer, who is just so exceptional that, I want to know if there's something I could ignite in them or offer that's valuable, that changes everything for them. Then who am I to hold that back? So I think that's where it's tough when you work as a professional coach and you want to mentor. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I think those are the situations that require a little more caution.
It's time for a quick sponsored ad from EMK Skincare. It's my skincare secret I swear by and love it so much, I bought the company. EMK was founded over 30 years ago in Beverly Hills and is crafted from science-backed research of human placenta and the bioidentical properties to placenta found in nature. High-potency, plant-powered formulas with clinically proven ingredients. Anti-aging is just not realistic, but healthy aging skin is. And it's why this brand is loved by dermatologists, plastic surgeons, estheticians for its healing ingredients and reduced downtime after procedures. It's my secret to glowing skin, even on my busiest days, my travel days, and my longest work days. Visit emkskincare.com to sign up for emails and receive 15% off your first purchase. Now back to the episode. Let's touch on authenticity, because in your book and in your practice, it is a word that is repeated and repeated. And I think it's overused these days. Like, I don't even know if people know what it.
I don't think they do either.
I don't think they know what it is. And so would you because if you're thinking about these behaviors with people and like you said, spending time, mentorship, bringing out that authenticity in that individual is probably a big piece of this. So will you sort of give us your cliff notes on authenticity and how you view it?
Sure. And I do agree with you. I mean, Merriam-Webster Dictionary gave authenticity the word of the year last year. And I'm
Did they really? Oh,
I don't know if there was an award and a crown and a sash. I don't know. And in the new book that I released, I actually don't use authentic and authenticity as much as I use realness. Because I think if I said, Rani, be real with me, you know what that means. I'm saying, let's cut through all the smoke and mirrors and pomp and circumstance. Let's just get real. There's a clarity there. But if I said, be authentic with me, like, I was. Like,
it's like, am I authentically supposed to be this person for you right now or someone else, or can I just be me?
And that's what realness is, right? So it's showing up as yourself, being open to learning, being in a growth mindset, being who you are unapologetically. But what it doesn't mean is transparency. And you've probably read a lot of this in what I write. I am not a fan of transparency.
Yeah,
I think
I gather.
Yeah.
Which is illuminating. I mean, most people are be transparent, and so I loved. Go ahead. Yes, I love that.
We want our government to be transparent, right?
Yes,
but there's nowhere written in our social contracts that I have to tell you everything about myself. And when people are trying to be authentic or being real, they often don't know where to stop, and they don't know where they're allowed to keep themselves safe. So I teach it as, be genuine. If you're going to answer a question, give a real, genuine, honest answer. You also reserve the right to say, Rani, I'm not comfortable answering that. That's perfectly fine. Similarly, don't jump in on every trending topic on social media thinking, well, if I'm not there, then I look like I'm agreeing with it. Says who? Where is that written? So keeping, yourself safe means setting up boundaries and guardrails. There are things that are nobody's business, right? What you've been through in your life, what challenges you're facing, what keeps you up at night, don't have to be everybody's business. You decide if you want to share them. If you don't want to share them, you may keep them private.
And you give people in your book, you give people permission to understand this. And that is what I loved about it, because it's often, taught the other way. Be transparent. If you're not, you're a liar. But this, I feel like, is more, it helps you be real, right? You can walk into that situation not crippled by, how much is too much? What do I share if I don't share? You start mulling all this over, and then you're just not you. So I think it frees people when they read your approach.
I would hope so. That is certainly my goal, because, do I have to comment on everything that shows up on social media? When something comes out in the news, I remember when the Roe versus Wade decision came down, my phone was ringing off the hook from clients going, do I have to have an opinion on this? Do I have to share that on Facebook? Some of them had real trauma attached to that whole part of the conversation. I'm like, no, you're CFO of a company. It has nothing to do with your job, what you feel about that topic. So I think we need to give ourselves permission. And I would advise, the way I teach it is, decide ahead of time where you're comfortable, right? If you don't want to talk about your children and the fact that you have young children in a job interview or at work or online, nowhere it says, do you have to do that? You don't want to talk about politics or religion online or at work? You don't have to. Just make that decision for yourself.
Yeah, and it's great advice. Politics, after our recent election, I'm sure your phone was ringing off the hook again. Where do we stand now? What do we do? How do we handle this? Any comment on the on the political divide?
I don't comment on politics,
of course, but just how to handle that, I guess, is really out.
What I try to advise clients, and this is where reputation repair gets us hung up, is we'll think we have to have an opinion. So we'll share something. It's not really who we are. And people who know us go, why would you share that? That's not what you believe. That's not what we experience. Now there's a disconnect in what we're reading and what we know. And that's where reputations can get fractured. So if you're going to jump in with both feet, but do it with, think ahead of time. Make sure you got the goggles and the nose plugs and the ear plug, all that stuff. It's people who get caught up in momentum that often overstep. And ask yourself, are you the right person to engage in that conversation, right? If I'm going to comment on something that affects a community that I don't come from, or I don't represent, or I don't have any affiliation with, am I really the right person to comment on that? Maybe not. So online and in person, we just have to set those intentions ahead of time. And then, like you said, it's very freeing. I know how to keep myself safe online. I know in conversations or on podcasts, when people ask me a question, I know how to, not answer it, because I know what those boundaries are for me. Doesn't mean I don't have strong opinions, but they're not part of my brand. They're not part of how I want other people to see me. So I can refrain from that very confidently.
Just thinking about your words, it goes both ways in a sense where the person sitting on the sideline who has thoughts and maybe does want to contribute, but is a little afraid of what it might do to the reputation, to the person who is always over contributing out there, who is oblivious to what it does to the reputation. So it really, it's practice on both sides of the coin. And so how do you take this authenticity? How do you take this authenticity? How do you take this real person and into your leadership styles when you are coaching executives? Because, we talk about social media and all of these other things outside, but how is that in the workplace to help them be them, but still be a leader and everything their company requires of them?
I think that's the easiest part. Because if they are truly honest, right, and they're real in our conversations, all we do when it comes to leadership development is we build on that, right? The foundation is who they are. We're just building on that when we look at, leadership skills and leadership development tactics. But leadership isn't a job title. It's a mindset. A manager, vice president, those are job titles. But we have a lot of managers who are great leaders, and we have a lot of managers who are managers, and that's perfectly fine. So when you have a leader who is focused on what it really means to lead people, to empower people, to grow and ideate and make things better, you still have to focus on outcomes because organizations measure on outcomes, right? But we can create a new narrative that includes this mindset of leadership where it's not always about me being at the center of every conversation. It's about helping you grow and helping you learn, mentoring you to be better. If you pass me up, I should be happy about that. I shouldn't resist or feel threatened by that. So it's very much a mindset. And I find that a lot of people, they come to me saying, I want to be a thought leader, or I want to be a leader in my industry. And when you really ask them what it is they want money, they want power, and they want authority. And it's like, that's not where influence comes from. So money and authority, you can get those. That's rank in the military, right? That's where rank comes in. But to have influence, you don't need to have a lot of money. You don't need to have the job title and positional authority. You just have to be really clear about who you are and who you want to serve. And then follow my 10 rules.
It's the new rules of influence. So I love this book. What inspired you to write it? I know that you have written books, but this particular one and the topics and the age we're in today.
This was a different child for me, if you will. And as I ask any parent, you're never supposed to say you have a favorite child, but if I did, that book would it is my favorite because I worked with
You say that in the intro of your book, don't you?
I do. I say something about, I really love that book. I mean, I don't know if you read any of my other things, but I typically write business books, right? So very tactical, very action steps and all of that. This was a call to action from my heart. And my publisher unleashed that. They said, don't write another business book. Don't write a book that is expected, right? Following up with research and anecdotes and all of this data. Write a book that you think the world needs. And I thought about the people who are sitting at their desk or sitting wherever they are going, I wonder if I'm meant to do more. I wonder if my idea could change things for the positive. I don't have the job title. No one has tapped me on the shoulder and said, okay, it's your turn, Lida. Now we want you to share. And there are so many of us who did what I did for 20 years, which is, just kind of went in the hamster wheel of progress and success, never really taking that ownership. So I wanted to give something to the people who were looking for a way to be heard and seen how they are and where they are that maybe hadn't been written before.
What's the feedback you're getting from the book? Like, what are the first steps and the impact that you're seeing from the readers?
Interesting. What I'm hearing is a lot of people read it through once and then they read it through a second time with the highlighter in hand. And that tells me that there are enough nuggets that people are really getting the point. A lot of people have said they didn't realize I could be funny, which I didn't understand because I thought it was very funny. But I write, and there's a little bit of humor in the book. I also share a lot about myself. So I'm getting feedback of, wow, I didn't know that about you. Because if I'm going to ask you to be real, I have to be real. And not all the stories are happy stories. I've failed at some things that I thought were really important. But I think there's a grittiness to the book that makes it practical. I'm a big believer that this idea of executive presence, as you and I were probably raised to believe it, doesn't work anymore. It's not the pillars of communication, gravitas, and image that are making people heard today. We look at someone like Greta Thunberg at 15 years old who sits in front of Swedish parliament and changes the narrative around climate change. Well, she didn't look the part. She wasn't old enough. And what is this thing called gravitas? Like, what is that? We all think gravitas is so important. We see it and we know it, but we don't know how to teach it. And I don't think that's really fair. Because if it's so important, we should be able to teach people to have it, right?
We should. And I think your book is very personal, by the way. You can connect with you almost through it. So kudos to you. Congratulations. It's beautifully written. And I would suggest it to everyone listening. And, this executive presence idea, I've got to touch on that because I think, would you define that for the women listening today in that? Because I think the way you approach it in the book is how I perceived it actually. Mm-hmm. And then when you dispel it a little bit, I was like, oh, okay. Like I get this. So would you mind touching on that topic? I don't want to give everything away, by the way, in the book, but just a little nugget about it.
Well, I think, there was and I'm using the air quotes, poster child for executive presence. And the poster child was always a middle-aged Caucasian man in a business suit with a red power tie. If you looked that way and you had his gravitas again, his je ne sais quoi, when he walked in the room, heads turned and, it was so mysterious. And you and I don't look like that, right? Mm-hmm. There are so many underrepresented voices who would look at that and think, well, that's not for me because I don't wear a suit. I'm not middle-aged. I'm not white. I'm not male. So how do I make myself heard? How do I get respect and credibility in my company? How do I get taken seriously? How do I move from the back of the room to the front of the room in a way that I feel confident doing? And executive presence, the way we were taught, was supposed to give us the system for that. And it just doesn't work anymore. And then COVID comes in, messes all the rules up because now we're sharing, we're being vulnerable, we're opening our homes and our hearts to people online and on video cameras. And we're seeing results go through the roof.
Oh, yeah.
Wait a minute. Where's all this scripting and airbrushing our photos and dressing a certain way? What happened to all that? Well, it doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. Is there a place in the world for people who want to live that way? 100%. There are certain industries that I think still support that model. Maybe they'll come around. Maybe they'll read my book. But I think for the rest of us, there wasn't anything that really helped us do it if we didn't fit the sort of Mad Men era view that was still widely held in many sectors.
Mm-hmm. Years ago, starting my insurance agency, when I was 26 years old, 25 years old, and I had this image in my mind of what it took to be a successful person. And it was the gentleman in my hometown growing up who is heavy, white guy, older guy, like glasses, like super frumpy office. I loved him. My family knew him very well. I loved him to death. But that image in my mind, I opened my first office. I had beautiful artwork everywhere. The feel and the vibe was different. I was like, I am not going to be the old insurance office looked like. I had this vision in my head. And I thought that's what you needed to be like that to be successful in that industry. And it's just not true. You touch on this in the book. I have a question for you though, in terms of personal branding, before we go, because I so appreciate our conversation and our time, I want to ask you, what would you say to the person who is posting photos or videos online? Because you just mentioned like, hey, now the raw stuff is really feeling good and that's what takes off. But some people out there listening to us think like, well, I post on my social media every day. That's my personal branding. Like, is that personal branding? Or what would you say to that person who feels like that's all they need to do? Or how would you speak to them?
So there are several tools that we use in marketing our personal brand. And you and I are doing these, people listening, we're doing these without even thinking about them. But when you grow intention around it, now you're being mindful. You're putting up those guardrails. Social media is one of them. How we show up online. The narrative that you introduce yourself with. So what is the story you tell about your career, about who you are? How do you answer that question? Rani, tell me about yourself, or tell us a little bit of background on you. How do you answer that question? Because the way you tell your story is what other people use to tell your story to other people. So narrative is a big part of how we build our brand. The networks that we hold, right? Who are the intentional strategic relationships that we curate through our personal brand goals to advance us, knowing that the expectation is we're going to help them too, right? It's not just one direction. That's sales, not networking. The way that we show up, our presence and our body language, the color choices that we make. And I like that you and I both chose, strong colors. That says something about us, right? Do you make eye contact with the camera if you're doing a video meeting? Or how does your body language play out when you're in person? There are all these touch points that build brand. And the one thing I want to say is personal branding is not about perfection. It is not about being perfect. We will all make mistakes because we're human beings, but it is very much about consistency. So if I see your social media profiles and then I meet you in person and you're a totally different person, there's a disconnect, and most people won't spend the time to try and understand where the disconnect is. They'll just move on. If the people that know you speak differently about you than you introduce yourself, or all those touch points have to work the same. It doesn't mean you have to be exactly the same on LinkedIn as you are on Instagram, because they're different platforms.
Right.
But you should be the same person. And I shouldn't wonder which one is the real you. That's where it becomes problematic.
What story are you telling about yourself online? Yeah. That's what I'm hearing. Lida, what mentor moment would you like to share with us today? It's that takeaway moment that we'll think back of all the mentorship you shared even in this episode. But what would you like to share with us?
I think my mentor moment would be that inside everyone listening, everyone who knows someone who is listening, that there is something beautiful to share. You are here for a very specific reason at this time in this moment. When you figure out what that is, it's almost an obligation, and it becomes unwavering. You can't even negotiate it to share that with other people. You have so many gifts, and giving those gifts away, it's not a zero-sum game. You get more gifts in return. So I'm a huge fan of mentoring. Please mentor. Find someone in your company, your community that you can mentor and give it away, because you will get 10 times more back.
And you are living your mentor moment, Lida. I can just feel it in you. You are. You are practicing what you're preaching.
Right.
How can our audience find you and support you?
Well, I'm definitely on pretty much every social media platform. My website is Lida360, LIDA360.com. The book is The New Rules of Influence, How to Authentically Build Trust, Drive Change, and Make an Impact. Available wherever books are sold. And I would love to hear from people who've read the book, because your feedback from other people, it fills my heart. That's why I wrote the book. So I'd love to connect with people who are listening, and definitely encourage them to continue to support this podcast, because you're really onto a great message here.
Thank you, Lida. It was such a pleasure meeting you. I'll be leaving that Google review or the Amazon review on your book. Amazon. That's a great reminder. You need Amazon reviews. When you buy a book, leave a review for someone.
Yes. Please.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Before you go, a huge thank you for being a part of this episode. I hope it left you with a spark of inspiration. And if you haven't already, hit that follow button and subscribe button to stay connected. Now is a great time. Your reviews are the heartbeat of our podcast. So if you enjoyed what you heard today, a review would really mean the world to us. Let's keep this conversation going as well on Instagram at Rani Alfers. Visit us at ranialfers.com for all episode show notes, and also to express your interest to be a guest. Please sign up. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, I'll see you back on Working Women Mentor.